organizations. It's the real groups that are like the cult. You say, who are they? They're scientist cults. Or will you do research programs on babies where we tell poor women that, your baby died right when they were born, but really go keep the baby alive and sometimes kill them, sometimes harvest them, sometimes do experiments on them. So that's why a lot of nurses have noticed now that the babies disappear at birth. They tell them, your baby died. That's why the governor said, who's actually an organ harvesting doctor, he goes, we keep the babies alive after they're born and have a discussion. They are getting caught now because we've decompartmentalized.
Wait a minute. I'm confused at what you're saying.
But see how it just never ends.
Yeah. What are you saying about babies? Like, what are they doing with babies?
I'm Teresa Deischer, and I am a scientist, the president and founder of Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute. What there is in the final product, when we use cells that have been made from an aborted fetus, are human fetal DNA fragments and cellular debris. And in quite high levels.
You saw the governor of Virginia say, we keep babies alive after they're born and kill them, right?
Well, I didn't see that.
We keep them comfortable.
But I am very, very concerned with late-term abortions.
What you have are procurement companies who are working side by side, literally, with the abortionist, and typically right in the building. So what happens with the heart is that it will actually go into this contracture. And once that happens, you can't get good data from it. You can't get cells that will beat and work. So the tissue really becomes useless. It has to be flushed and put into a preservative that stops the heart within 2 minutes. The baby has to be born alive, or they're not going to be able to get the heart and get it rushed and get it in the blocked solution, right, so that they can preserve it for processing.
Well, this is post-birth, Joe. So understand,
post-birth.
How much money do you think they get for a 7.5 pound baby they can keep alive for 2 weeks? And mama doesn't know.
So
if they can register the organs and get bidders,
but wait a minute,
then they can make $500,000.
Wait a minute, you're saying that the
baby they kill on the spot only gets $50,000.
The baby has to be born alive, or they're not going to be able to get the heart and get it rushed and get it in the blocked solution, right, so that they can preserve it for processing.
What are you saying? That they take the baby from the mother and the mother doesn't know that the baby's alive?
Yeah. You know how they engineer tomatoes to last on the shelf?
Yes.
You can pull all this up. California's passed it. Virginia's about to pass it. New York's trying to pass it. California's trying to pass it. 3 other states are trying to pass it to keep babies alive and allow. Notice the governor goes, we don't want, it's a 3-minute clip, pull it up. We don't want the government involved. The doctors and the mother who's drugged up, you didn't say that, are going to decide about the future. And maybe she keep baby alive a week. Maybe she decided to get rid of baby.
Wait a minute. Is this a viable baby? There's nothing wrong with this baby?
Viable? The Senate voted 3 days ago on Monday to not pass a bill for post-birth abortion to not kill.
Wait. Post-birth?
It says viable babies already born can be killed. If the you're going to Snope said. Hey, why don't you do this, Jamie?
What source?
Jamie, go to the source of the governor. Okay. Go to YouTube and type in Governor of Virginia talks about post-birth abortion and watch the unedited 3-minute video.
How do you call it abortion if it's already been born? Let's listen to this.
Is this the video where he says it?
After birth abortion. Is this it, Jamie?
I hope.
Is this it, Alex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Committee hearing yesterday when Fairfax County Delegate Kathy Tran made her case for lifting restrictions on third trimester abortions as well as other restrictions now in place. And she was pressed by a Republican delegate about whether her bill would permit an abortion even as a woman is essentially dilating, ready to give birth. And she answered that it would permit an abortion at that stage of labor. Do you support her measure and explain her answer?
Yeah, and I wasn't there, Julie, and I certainly can't speak for Delegate Tran, but I will tell you first thing I would say is this is why decisions such as this should be made by providers, physicians, and the mothers and fathers that
Usurping
are
law.
involved.
Jamie, I didn't mean to interrupt. Start
there
over.
are-
Back it up 10 seconds. Notice he's usurping law. And their
Okay.
whole plan is bioethics. I'll
Let's-
explain in a minute.
But let's let him
sorry, go
talk.
ahead.
It's only 2 minutes.
Mothers and fathers that are involved. There are, when we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physicians, more than one physician, by the way. And it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's non-viable. So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So I think this was really blown out of proportion. But again, we want the government not to be involved in these types of decisions. We want the decision to be made by the mothers and their providers. And this is why, Julie, that legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, shouldn't be telling a woman what she should and shouldn't be doing with her body.
And do you think multiple physicians should have to weigh in as is currently required? She's trying to lift that requirement.
Well, I think it's always good to get a second opinion and for at least two providers to be involved in that decision, because these decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. And so, I would certainly support more than one provider.
All right, let's go back to the phone.
Wow, that's a weird thing that she just kind of let him say.
Where is he? Where's my baby?
He's not dead.
What?
A voice
Where is he?
still cries out to be heard, loud and strong. Listen. Can you hear that?
Well, a fetus born intact is definitely dead when they cut its heart out. And they're not given any anesthetic. I would never do this to a mouse or a rat. I would not be surprised that we might get some hard numbers, not in the so distant future, that abortions are delayed later and later so that the scientists and the procurement companies can get better late terms.
But hold on a second. What's weird is that they were talking about resuscitating the baby, that they would keep the baby alive, then a decision would be made. Isn't that's like euthanasia? Like you can't even do that to your Grammy.
That's why you're so smart, John. I'm not kissing your ass.
But you can't do that.
You hear that? That's the sound of life. The sound of humanity. His cry of love. His love for you.
So we have to get rid of the babies. That's a big problem. Just stopping having babies is not enough. We need to eat the babies, and this is very serious. Please give a response.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you.
High levels.
We'll go ahead.
MMR, chickenpox, Zostavax, that's shingles from Merck, all hepatitis A containing vaccines, Pentacell, the polio component of that, and one of the rabies vaccines.
I eat little baby's ice cream. It keeps me young. It keeps me light on my feet. I spring from activity to activity. I love my job. I love my life. When you eat little baby's ice cream, you'll wink and nod and hug and high-five each other with great enthusiasm.
They say that, so let me explain. Now you've got it. Did you hear that, legalese? Turns out, when I saw that clip a month ago, because they had them doing debate about the bill,
Right.
and they said, yeah, we'll kill babies after they're born. And they're debating, well, how far along? Well, whatever the doctors say.
2 minutes. The baby has to be born alive, or they're not going to be able to get the heart and get it rushed and get it in the blocked solution, right, so that they can preserve it for processing.
Do you really think There's people out there campaigning for late-term abortions. You think that shit's real? You think that shit's real?
Voted Monday to keep it legal.
Who would do that? Who would do that? Who would campaign for? That's
They
the most.
fucking did it,
That is
Bravo,
the craziest
and
shit
you
ever.
can't fucking admit they're fucking killing already born kids. So you're telling me it isn't real when they had a fucking vote in the goddamn fucking Senate?
That's
What
a
the
conspiracy theory.
I am ready to beat your
That's a
fucking ass.
conspiracy theory.
You think you're fucking tough? You're about to get it. Bullshit! They're killing already born babies. Stop fucking lying. God fucking damn it. I'm getting pissed now.
Well, it's not an old technique. Some of the cell lines that they're using for vaccine manufacture were made back in the 70s. They're starting to kind of poop out, so they actually have to make new cell lines to replace those. On a daily basis, aborted babies are harvested and exploited for biomedical research, and the practice continues because we close our eyes to the ethics of vaccines. And when we do that to people who don't share our moral outlook, there's no difference between an abortion done in 1970 and abortion done yesterday.
I am a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
And I believe in vaccinations.
And I believe in vaccinations.
If you don't vaccinate your kids, it can endanger their lives.
The potential downsides of vaccinations are almost non-existent.
The cumulative...
We absolutely know that the levels of DNA in these vaccines get into our children's bloodstream at levels that are above, sometimes 100-fold higher than levels of fetal DNA that has been demonstrated to massively activate the immune response, causing a general cytokine release, and cytokines are toxins. And we are giving children 10 to 100-fold higher concentrations. We absolutely know toll-like receptor 9 will be activated. The pharmaceutical companies have never measured cytokine release, and they've never measured that acute autoimmune response.
And I find this conversation very, very interesting because, as you know, I was a producer on the daytime talk show The Doctors. So I tend to look at things from a scientific perspective. I spent 6 years working on that show, really looking at the scientific reasons things are done, celebrating the best in medicine, celebrating the best doctors and scientists that are out there. But this is an interesting topic because so often we say there's science and then there's religion as though those two never cross. But in this one circumstance, I think they come colliding headlong into each other. I mean, here you have to imagine that, most, religions would say it's an abomination to abort a baby to begin with. And then it's a further abomination to take that baby that, as she's described very horrifically, I said this is going to be a scary show, is born alive so that you can harvest the materials the way you need to without any sort of sedatives. So this is an incredibly awful experience for this poor soul. And then we take that DNA and we grow viruses on it. And then we, on the cell lines, and then we inject them into you. I mean, it's really, really crazy. And we're seeing more and more rises in cancer and autoimmune disease. Dr. Deisher's done some amazing studies that, in fact, ICANN has helped fund a few of her studies looking at the MMR vaccine and how she showed that the stem cells are coming up and grabbing the little pieces of DNA that are fragmented in that vaccine and mutating themselves. Folks, you don't want your stem cells mutating. Trust me on that. I'm not going to get into a big detail on that, but you don't want your stem cells mutating. Then they just start recreating that problem throughout your body. But if you were thinking Dr. Teresa Deisher is all alone, there's been some really amazing studies coming out of Italy. This is a paper that came out of Corvelva, and I'm bringing in our own Jeffrey Jackson to talk about MRC5 contained in Preorix tetra complete genome sequencing. I believe that's their version of the MMRV that we're using here. They found some really interesting things when they started looking at the DNA and the genome inside of vaccines. So Jeffrey is joining me. Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Del. Thanks for having me.
All right. Give me the scoop. I mean, we know Teresa Deisher has been, yelling from the mountaintops. This is a really stupid thing to be doing, to be injecting fragments of DNA. And I say fragments because as I've been speaking all across the country, talking about the vaccine safety project that we created, I say that it's the fragments that are really the problem. And when I say that, I'm just thinking there's just pieces of DNA, right? A small part of the DNA chain. But this study actually shows us something far more complexing. They're not just fragments, are they?
No, and you mentioned it was done by the Corvalva Association. That's out of Italy. They've been around since '93, providing information and scientific research surrounding vaccines. And they looked at the Priorix Tetra MMRV vaccine. They used sequencing. It was basically a next generation sequencing technology. This is revolutionary technology, really new to the field. It allows rapid sequencing of the entire single genome to map mutations. The genome is a complete set of genes. It's kind of like the building material and the instructions, and it's contained in all the cells that are sequenced or that are found. An example of that, because this was something when I was looking at this study, just trying to wrap my head around this new technology here and the epigenetics and genome sequencing. And these are a lot of new words for the public. So basically, it's the method. You take a cancer patient, for example, and you can fully decode their normal tissue and you can fully decode their cancerous tissue. And you can compare those two and see, okay, where along the lines did this genetic sequencing go awry to form this cancer? So it allows, a really a depth of focus on some of this stuff. So what Corvalva found in the MMRV vaccine, their results was they found, quote, the human reference genome was found to be matched by 99.76% reads from vaccine DNA. That means nearly in all its entirety. The human fetal DNA presented in this vaccine is a single entire genome. That means the vaccine contains genomic DNA with all the chromosomes of a male individual. So this is interesting because we've been told that, well, we just culture the vaccine material on this MRC5 cell line, but it's not getting into the vaccine very much. This completely turns that all on its head. This information from this next generation sequencing.
Wow. And so when you were saying the ability now to sort of grab DNA or cell lines and then run them through sort of rapid imaging. And I think that idea of being able to compare the two is really fascinating. I don't know why, but it immediately pumped up. It was like, what was it, the Sesame Street? One of these genomes is not like the other, not like the other. I mean, that's what they're doing, right? They're comparing the two and saying, how are they different? And we're recognizing that there's mutations taking place, correct?
Absolutely. And
so what did they find? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. In Corvalva's report, they actually showed kind of a graphical representation of this for people, and I found this kind of interesting to see. So there's a picture on one side of a normal human genome, and on the other side is the MRC5 human genome taken right from the Priorix Tetra vaccine. So those orange lines on the right that are all bunched up in the center of the diagram, those represent genomic anomalies. So those are not supposed to be there. On the left side, you don't see many of those orange lines. That's because that's a normal human genome. So what the heck are those orange lines? Why are there genetic anomalies in this genome in the vaccines? So this is where the story gets a little deeper and a little more concerning. So Corvalva chose 560 genes to analyze, and they were chosen because they're involved in different forms of human cancer. So what they found was the variations or the modifications of the genes were associated with tumor forms that were identified. So this is these variations were basically associated with cancer in human cells on all the 560 verified genes that they were using. So these variations and modifications they found, however, were not present in the public databases. So they're basically saying, look, we found abnormalities on genes that in normal human cells will cause cancer when they have these sort of abnormalities, but we don't know what the heck these abnormalities actually are or are doing in these genomes. Lots of questions going on.
but it's possible because so many of them relate to cancer that we are injecting essentially cancer-causing agents right into our children, right? I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. I mean, obviously, this is just the beginning of research that probably should have been done 200 years ago and then 100 years ago, and is one of those things we keep asking for. But luckily, someone is starting to look into this, and we have a massive rise in cancer. We have a gigantic rise in childhood leukemia. I mean, I think these are the things that when we walk around our society, you know, I know a lot of people say, you know, you shouldn't listen to Del Batry, but just listen to your own instincts. I mean, that's really what I try to talk about on the show. If you're walking around and asking yourself, geez, I just don't remember babies having cancer as often as they do. I don't remember children with cancer. When you heard the word cancer back when we were kids, they would always show you images of old people. That it was sort of like, you know, you were dying earlier than you should have, but you didn't see kids with it. You didn't really even see teenagers. But now we have babies with cancer. What is causing that? I know, you know, a lot of medicine and doctors will probably point to the food and the air and the water. And yes, I think all of those things we should be looking at too. But seriously, we're injecting these things, and now we finally look at the genome and find out that there's 560 something, you know, potentially cancer-causing genes. You know, where do you think this is going? Where's this study going? What is it? And by the way, I've seen a lot of reporting that they believe it was purposefully done, right? I've seen many articles saying that, you know, somebody purposely mutated this genome that they put in the vaccine to cause cancer. I have a hard time wrapping my head around thoughts. I mean, that may be the case, but that's, you know, I think that we should, you know, refrain from making a statement that big. To me, there's really just a lot of stupid people, geniuses of science, that are making huge mistakes. But that accusation's out there, right? I mean, because it's so, you know, so different than what should have been a natural human genome, that those theories are out there.
Yeah, and you know, people can take people of that mindset can take this article and just hold it up as proof to this. But I think there's a more important issue here. We have a vaccine safety paradigm that is revolving around old, outdated, obsolete technology now. So forget about the double-blind placebo-based trials and studies that weren't done for the safety testing. Now we have next-generation genome sequencing that are showing issues. And our regulatory agencies are not, they've been caught pretty much with their pants down on this, because the FDA does not consider residual DNA from human diploid cells in vaccines to be a safety issue. So they're not even measuring it. So one of the issues with this is that in the in the rubella component alone, there's 10 times over the limit that's just suggested in manufacturing. So the limit is 10 nanograms per vaccine dose, and the rubella component was found to have 175 nanograms.
Oh my God.
Even in their limited kind of like, hey, maybe just don't go over 10. We don't think it's a safety issue, but just maybe try to stay under 10 nanograms. They're blowing that out of the water. They have no clue what's going on. So here we have the FDA again asleep at the wheel, not keeping up with new technology. And this technology has been going on for at least about a decade.
It's interesting you bring that up, that the FDA does not recognize that there's any problem with, tumorigenic cells in, cell lines being used for vaccines. But actually, when we were preparing for this, some people I work with over in Europe sent me a study that I hadn't seen before. It comes from last year. It addresses exactly this. Take a look at this. This is from the FDA. And they were looking at exactly this issue. I believe this is coming out of 2018. Investigating viruses in cells used to make vaccines and evaluating the potential threat posed by transmission of viruses to humans. It goes on to say, virus-based vaccines are made in living cells, cell substrates. Some manufacturers are investigating the use of new cell lines to make vaccines. The continual growth of cell lines ensures that there is a consistent supply of the same cells that can yield high quantities of the vaccines. In some cases, the cell lines that are used might be tumorigenic. That is, they form tumors when injected into rodents. Some of these tumor-forming cell lines may contain cancer-causing viruses that are not actively reproducing. Such viruses are hard to detect using standard methods. These latent or quiet viruses pose a potential threat since they might become active under vaccine manufacturing conditions. Therefore, to ensure the safety of vaccines, our laboratory is investigating ways to activate latent viruses in cell lines and to detect the activated viruses as well as other unknown viruses using new technologies. These methods will enable FDA scientists to help manufacturers to determine whether their specific cell substrate is safe to use for vaccine production. And ending with detection of latent viruses in cell substrates for vaccine safety. The urgent demand for vaccines against emerging diseases has necessitated the use of novel cell substrates. These include tumorigenic cells such as MDCK and CHO cells for influenza virus vaccines, 293 per point C6 cells for adenovirus vectored HIV-1 and other vaccines, and tumor-derived cells such as HeLa cells for HIV-1 vaccines. What's amazing about this conversation here is back in 2018 is over and over again, if you read the whole article, it says, we're doing this for the future vaccines and cell lines of the future. Well, since this is a brand new technology and you're just now figuring out how to do it, which apparently I think in Italy they must be a part of, they're doing similar things and we've got new technology to be able to look at this. Why is the FDA only looking at future cell substrates for future vaccines? Why in here don't I have them saying, of course, we're also going to go back and test and look at the 16 vaccines that were never through a placebo study that we're giving every child in America by force, by government force. Why doesn't it say that? It doesn't say that, Jeffrey, and this runs to the problem. Because our government has already infected and injected this crap into all of our children. So how do they admit, oops, well, Houston, we made a mistake. It turns out that the cell lines we were using were carcinogenic. And this is why we cannot, when people say Dell spreads, misinformation and makes people paranoid about government agencies and regulatory agencies and their science. You're damn right I do. I do not trust the government. I'm like George Carlin.
I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero.
I don't trust the government, full stop. Especially when they promote a product that they force into us, more and more states forcing these products into our children without our choice, then how can I trust that they would ever let me know that they made a mistake? How can they? How are they going to be able to admit to a mistake if they've already forced all of us to use the product? Do you realize that that would be the destruction of the faith of the U.S. government? The destruction of the faith of our health departments? That's what's going on here. When you need to find a motive, a detective needs a motive. A journalist needs many times to figure out a motive so you can get to why things are happening. Why is the science so crappy when it comes to vaccines? I don't think you need a greater motive than to recognize because our government has already forced these products into us. People say, oh, it's just like tobacco and tobacco science. It's nothing like tobacco science. The U.S. government never forced children to smoke cigarettes. Okay? So even though there's a huge cover-up by the industry saying, oh, cigarettes don't cause cancer or cigarettes are not addictive, our government allowed eventually enough studies to be done and backed it up and said, you know what? Science is showing that you're lying. How can they do that with vaccines? They're not going to be able to do that, folks. So now you're stuck on a wing and a prayer. Now you are literally going to have to pray that luckily, by some chance, the pharmaceutical industry has made the one product that accidentally is perfectly safe. And I mean accidentally because it never went through a single proper study that every drug we take does. How many drugs never get into the population because it just didn't qualify after a placebo-based study? It was dangerous. It did what? It caused cancer, folks. That's one of the main things we test for in multi-year double-blind studies is cancer. And here we're finding out that they recognize it at the FDA. They're only going to look at future vaccines. They're recognizing in Italy, in the vaccines we're using right now, Where does this go? How many Americans are going to walk around blind? How many of them are going to keep celebrating being a part of some herd? They love being cows. They love being goats. They don't want to know the truth. Because the truth is terrifying. It's truly scary. Jeffrey, it's really, really an amazing story. And it really points to why, as dark as this time may seem, and these discussions, and it's a perfect time in Halloween with, bats flying around us, to sort of look at the scary side. One thing I feel really good about is the bloodhounds of science are on this. I've never been anti-science, Jeffrey. You know that. You come from, you have to come from a science background. You were almost going to be a doctor. I love science. That's why we're here. And science is how are they going to avoid it? When you have gene sequencing at your fingertips, the only way to avoid, sequencing the genes and DNA in a vaccine is to not do it. The only way you could ever avoid proving that the vaccines are causing cancer is to just not look at it. And luckily in Italy, they're looking at it. And I'm sure Paul Offit and all the spokespeople for our U.S. government vaccine program will come out and say, that study, don't listen to it, don't listen to Dell. But go ahead, will you read this, folks? When you're watching the Highwire, will you do me a favor? Will you please type ICAN right now into your comments? Will you go and read these studies? Will you look at what the FDA is admitting to? If future cell lines, because of new technology, could cause cancer, how is it possible that the old ones don't? And how would they know if they're not going to do these studies on them? I'm not telling you what to think on this show. I'm not saying definitively that vaccines cause cancer. What I'm saying is, man, if you're not asking that question, you're nuts!
Well said, Del. Well said. Well, I can say that this is interesting because our regulatory agencies don't seem, in a lot of instances here with drugs and vaccines and medical devices, to be trailblazing the safety and efficacy of these things. They seem to be trying to follow and cover up their tracks. It's people working outside scientific consensus. This is the settled science, the tenure within universities that keep such tight guardrails on these researchers so they don't go outside of those. It's people working outside of those, scientists, researchers, doctors that are finding these things out and are waving the white flag. And our regulatory agencies and the rest of the medical community has a choice to make. They can either change their standards or they can try to cover it up. And we'll see what the FDA does with this. They're announcing that, hey, we know this might be a problem for new vaccines, but like you said, what about the old ones? Are they going to change standards? Are they going to start requesting these be tested before they be rolled out to the population?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just reflecting as you were talking back on my metaphor before of these steroid-induced grizzly bears that are hopped up on PCP. In this situation, the solution for doctors and government officials is, how we're going to fix this problem? Put on blindfolds. Now they're just wandering around a bunch of steroid hopped up PCP, smoking grizzly bears. It's really crazy. It's really crazy to see how this entire system is working. Jeffrey, once again, amazing reporting. Thank you for bringing that story to us, and I look forward to speaking again in the very near future. Take care.
All right, will do. Thanks.
If there's even a chance it's possible, folks, if there's even a chance that when you sequence these genes that they seem to have, cancer-causing tumorigenic properties, don't you want more science? Don't you want to see, for instance, a vaccinated versus completely unvaccinated trial or study, retrospective? It doesn't have to break your moral code. We have the database at the CDC called the VSD, Vaccine Safety Data Link. They have 10 million people in that they've been tracking for nearly 50 years now. We can simply go into that database and ask a really, really easy question because we've got these brand new things called computers. And here's what you do with a computer. You take all of that information and you say, let's ask a question. Vaccinated group, fully unvaccinated group, who has more cancer? Just that simple. If you want to get really, really in depth, go, who has more leukemia? Whatever you want to do. And guess what? The answer will come right out. when we were at the National Institute of Health, sitting across from the heads of infectious disease, Tony Fauci and the head of the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins and Joshua Gordon and all these other luminaries, we said, just do the vax versus unvax study. Hashtag do the study. Do the damn study. You know what they said?